So I was set up in the sitting room, but I got kicked out because there's an infant in the house now. Yup. I will show you a picture of him here.
That's why I have like abused my own baby.
Doing this again. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Let's do this. So there's no summary on the back for this one, so I'm just going to have to give you an incredibly broad one. And just before I start, once again, if you are trying to use this video as an attempt to get out of reading the book, what are you doing with your life? I am 16 years old. I'm not a literary scholar. Go ask a literary scholar about this. I will even link the Spark Note right here on my glasses. Let's get started summarizing, shall we? First act is called Fun and Games. And so it's essentially just that. The main characters of this story are a husband and a wife named George and Martha. Martha's in her 50s, George is in his 40s, and George is the assistant professor of history at a college where Martha's father basically owns the college. And so they come home at 2 a.m. at the start of the play, and they're going to get to go to bed when Martha's like, oh, wait, the new biology professor and his wife are going to come see us at 2 in the morning, because why the hell not? Starts the play with George warning Martha, don't talk about their son. Their son. So after that, the new biology professor, his name is Nick, and his wife Honey show up and they get drunk. And so while they're drunk, Nick and Honey kind of act as an audience to George and Martha making fun of each other and trying to make them embarrassed. For example, Martha brings up a time that she beat up George because she could. And George is incredibly embarrassed by that, and he's not going to take that. So he spends the entire act also trying to make Martha look like an idiot. But in this first act, they're just kind of doing normal making fun of each other stuff, nothing very serious. The act ends with Martha and George yelling at each other after telling the story of how they got married and their son, and then Honey vomits. The second act is called Walpurgisnacht, which means Walpurgisnacht in German, and Walpurgisnacht is supposedly the night that all the witches come out and try and mess your life up. And that's essentially what happens in this portion of the play. Martha and George are spending the entire time trying to further discredit each other and further make each other sound like idiots, while it also comes out that their audience, Nick and Honey, aren't the Nick and Honey that they seem to be. It turns out that Nick only married Honey not because of love, but because people thought that he got her pregnant, and he thinks that she is annoying and slim-hipped and not nice. So over the course of this, Martha keeps trying to make George feel bad. She tells Nick and Honey that it turns out George has killed both of his parents. He shot his mother and then got in a car crash with his father, and he died. Basically them getting further and further into the insulting each other, long past where it's just friendly joshing in front of the new couple. Nick and Martha kiss because she can. Honey and George are spending time talking to each other. They don't kiss. Honey is getting drunker and drunker and puking when the doorbell rings, and there is a telegram saying that George and Martha's son is dead. The act ends very creepily with George whispering, Martha, Martha, I've got some terrible news for you. It's about our son. He's dead. Can you hear me, Martha? Our son is dead. And that's how that act ends. And yes, it is incredibly creepy. And so the third act is called The Exorcism. It is also implied that in between Act 2 and Act 3, Martha and Nick have done the diddly. It begins with Martha hysterically monologuing. She's talking to herself, but thinks she's talking to George, and Martha has just gone completely insane by this point. The play ends with this third act just being an intense and giant argument between Martha and George talking about their son. Martha is basically just fantasizing about her son, who at this point I hope you realize doesn't actually exist. She's telling us this whole story of his life, but he's never existed. And then Nick and Honey leave after George tells Martha that their son is dead, killed in the late afternoon on a country road with his learner's permit in his pocket. He swerved to avoid a porcupine and drove straight into a large tree, coincidentally the same way that George killed his father. The play ends with George singing and asking Martha, "Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf?" And Martha responding, "I am, George, I am." And that's the end. And one thing I would like to say, the big bother about me with this play is I looked up the song that's to the tune to, the Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf. So everyone in my family is ready to kill me because I've just been going around for the past 2 days singing, "Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf? Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?" So my opinions for this are drastically better than the last book that I read. I didn't hate it. I don't know if I would read it again. Like, I feel like if I was reading this for pleasure, it would have touched me more than if I was reading it to find symbolism and stuff. And I did. There's the whole story of illusion, and there's the whole story of how the happy American family can't really exist, which is something that comes up a lot in Albee's work. I don't really have complaints about this book. I did enjoy it. I like reading plays more so because I feel like without having to wade through all the characters' thoughts and just being able to judge them by their actions, you can see who they are more deeply than having to try and understand what they're thinking. Like in White Noise, it was just, I get it, white noise. I feel like this narration is here to just signify white noise instead of actually tell the story. Whereas with this, I feel like as a person who acts and does theater, I feel more comfortable reading in dialogue and stage direction, especially because I just love the disconnect between the dialogue and the stage direction in this. Something that I enjoy. And it also served to further highlight the illusion within this play. I feel like Nick and Honey are there, but they're definitely not the main characters. They're there to serve as the audience for George and Martha's brouhaha. And essentially, this couldn't have gone on, the entire action of this play couldn't have gone on without Nick and Honey being there, because George and Martha enjoy having an audience for their insulting each other. I feel like it would have been also really interesting to see this acted out. I could only find like a college level like community theater production of this, and it would have been great to see this acted out by, you know, competent actors. There is a movie, but I don't know, I don't like watching the movie versions of plays very much because there are so many limits based on the fact that it's a play, and when they take those limits away in the movie setting, I feel like it's very different from how the playwright originally intended for it to be, which in this case was just supposed to be like a madhouse. There are also a couple little references to outside works, and most of them I didn't get without having to look up. But there was one part that I really enjoyed at the beginning of the third act. George shows up with a bunch of snapdragons and quotes A Streetcar Named Desire by saying, "Flores, flores para los muertos, flores," which means flowers, flowers for the dead, flowers. And I don't know, it brought me back to the sort of decline into madness that Blanche went through in Streetcar Named Desire, and it reminded me that Martha is essentially also descending into madness over the course of this play. They're both in the midst of a psychotic break, at least the way that it appears to me. They're both in the midst of a psychotic break. However, George is more in the midst of a sadistic psychotic break, whereas Martha is just completely destroying herself. She starts off this play as this very big, almost liberated character, I believe. She's the one who is in control of George. She's the one who has all of this power in this relationship, whereas at the end it ends with her cracking, curled up on the floor with George comforting her, and he ends up basically over the course of this play, it's called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf because Martha spends the entire play singing and bothering George by singing, "Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf, Virginia Woolf, who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?" and it just keeps bothering him. But he ends this play when she is in this complete weak state by throwing her words back in her face. It's suggested that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf means who's afraid of reality, who's afraid of finding out their true self. And so she throws these words at George all throughout this play, saying, you're afraid of the truth, you're afraid of what really happened. But in the end, it turns out that she's the one who's been terrified this entire time. I really enjoyed this. Like, much more so. I wish that I had started with this play as opposed to starting with White Noise, because I feel like White Noise kind of put me in that frame of mind, like, this is all gonna be crap. But this has saved me from that worldview. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee. I really wish that I could see this performed. And I would, if I was 52, I would really like to perform as Martha, because maybe it's just me, I like mad characters. It's fun to pretend to be crazy. Okay, so the next video is probably not going to be for another little while, because the next book I'm going to be reading is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. And as you can see, Catch-22 is a much thicker book than any of the other books we've read. Alright, everybody. Bye-bye. I'm going to get to reading this now. Bye-bye. Mwah.